In this final session, distinct from the other sessions where we've taken these different disciplinary viewpoints on our question of character cultivation in the university, here in this final section, we're going to be taking a practical perspective, bringing the conference to a close by taking a look at one particular example of an effort to cultivate character amongst university students. And that example is the example of the Oxford Character Project. My name is Ed Brooks, and it's been my privilege over the last 3 years to be involved in developing, establishing the Oxford Character Project as part of a team, many of whom you'll meet, with a particular role thinking about character cultivation in a programme we've run called the Oxford Global Leadership Initiative, and you'll hear more of that. Just as we stand at the outset, we're very well aware of this privilege we have now to share with this audience something of our work. We're very well aware that many here have much more experience than we do in cultivating character in university contexts over many years. We're aware too, and we've built on much of your research, and you'll see that we owe a debt to the Jubilee Centre, and it was wonderful to hear from Liz and Blair earlier. We owe a massive debt as well to the work of Christian Miller, and you'll see very explicitly some of Christian's work coming through as Jonathan and Michael share something of our research. The way the time will proceed will be the first part I'll hand over in a moment to Jonathan, who will introduce our work as the director of the Oxford Character Project. Michael Lamb, who's sitting next to me here, who's done a wonderful job leading our research, will then come and share more about that in the academic part of our programme, before we then invite up 4 panellists to then have an interactive discussion. 2 students who've been involved in our work, Dr. Yuge Ma and Dr. Vinton Cheng, Professor Samson Tsay, who's visiting from Hong Kong and whom we had the chance to collaborate with just recently, and Dr. Bethan Willis, who's also part of the Oxford Character Project team, and there'll be a discussion then amongst them, and inviting you in to join and be part, and please do contribute at that point as well. At the outset, and before I hand over to Jonathan and Michael, we'd like very much to thank the Templeton World Charity Foundation, who have generously sponsored and supported this work and made it possible over the last 3 years, and kindly continuing to do so. To the McDonald Centre and to Professor Nigel Bigger, we're very grateful indeed for your housing of the research of this work, your personal support and encouragement for taking us under your wing. We're very grateful and much appreciate all your advice and encouragement. And the Oxford Pastorate under Professor Lionel Tarasenko, who's not here, but out of that organisation, the Oxford Pastorate, this project could grow and continues to work in partnership with. Without further ado, please let me introduce our 2 speakers. Firstly, Dr. Michael Lamb, who is University Scholar in Residence and Fellow in the Office of Personal and Career Development at Wake Forest University, and also the MacDonald Templeton Postdoctoral Fellow here at Oxford. Michael has spent his time here over the last 3 years helping to launch the Oxford Character Project, playing an instrumental role on the research side and developing the curriculum, playing a role in delivering that too amongst the students. And we're incredibly grateful to have the chance to work with him. Michael now is back across at Wake Forest, where he's working there to establish a similar programme, and we're excited to be able to keep in touch and continue to work together. Michael, to my left, to left of Michael, Dr. Jonathan Brandt is the director of the Oxford Character Project, as well as a member of Oxford University's Faculty of Theology and Religion, and an associate research fellow here at the MacDonald Centre. Jonathan is going now to introduce the work we've been doing. If you notice the creative perspectives, that's perhaps Jonathan's influence coming through. His academic research focuses at the intersection of theology and film. So first over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Ed, and everyone for being here this morning. I think we owe the pithiest, that's a dangerous word to use, explanation of the rationale of our project to Donald Hay, an economist, former head of the Social Sciences Division here in Oxford, former Pro-Vice Chancellor at the university. And when we were beginning to think about this project, it was him in a short paper that he wrote for us who came up with this question. There is no doubt, it is simply empirically true that Oxford University, the big global research university, produce thinkers and leaders and invest a huge amount in the production of those thinkers and leaders. It's slightly less self-evident that they produce wise thinkers and good leaders, and even less evident, I think, that a huge amount of resources invested into that process. So it was with that question in mind that we began to think about and initially to set up the Oxford Character Project. And really, we decided that what we wanted to do was to provide the opportunity, encouragement, and resources specifically to postgraduate students to help them not merely to accumulate academic qualifications while they were here or to hone particular skills, but to grow towards being wise thinkers and good leaders. And so we assume that Oxford postgraduates, an incredibly gifted, passionate group of young people drawn from 120 nations of the world, will go on to hold positions of responsibility and have influence in the future. So the question is, whilst postgraduate academic courses rightly focus on intellectual knowledge and specific skills, what can be done to help them to develop the character that they need in order to become those good leaders who will promote the public good in all the many nations of the world from which they've been drawn and to which they will return? And so we believe that at a time when the character of those in public leadership is being called into question, this aspect of education is as important, if not more important, than ever. And so the Character Project was set up from the beginning as a joint research and practical program. And in order to have the maximum possible impact, we developed an interdisciplinary initiative that aimed to supplement this postgraduate education focused on the acquisition of knowledge, expertise, and skills with a rigorous academically informed program for character development. And so the research side of the project covers both theoretical and empirical studies focusing on character and moral formation in a particular phase of life that's coming to be called emerging adulthood. And the research has already been said by Ed, has been run under the auspices of the McDonald Centre, and we're hugely grateful for that. And we're currently building other relationships, including with Torch, the Oxford Research Centre in the humanities. But I think it's really important to note that the primary focus of our project is impact on the postgraduate students. And so the research, whether it's the theoretical or the empirical, the measurement attempt, is intended to serve that end. And so if we're thinking in the language of outputs and outcomes, then the primary outputs of our project will be students who participated, of which there are a number here this morning, and the primary outcomes would be an increased sort of beneficial impact around the world to whatever it is that they go on to do from Oxford. At the core of the practical action are three formation groups, learning communities, you could use different language around it, which stay together for up to one academic year. And you'll notice the three groups on the bottom right of the slide here. So this initiative grew out of a Christian chaplaincy, the Oxford Pastorate, mentioned by Ed. And so two of our groups are aimed specifically at postgraduate students at Oxford who have and are practicing a Christian faith. And the third group, which is led by Ed Brooks, is open to those of any religious commitment, no religious commitment, whatever philosophical background they come from. And the past 3 years that we've been running this project has been really a wonderful experience, but without question or doubt, for me, the greatest joy has been the team that I've been able to work with. I'm in a very fortunate position. The team that I work with goes beyond the Character Project, so there's Kate here, who runs a lot of chaplaincy work for us, Claire, who's been setting up all of this conference you've already met. But right now, I would love to introduce the people who lead these particular streams of programming for us, in case over lunch you wanted to grab them and have a quick conversation. So first of all, the Reverend Kate Seagrave, who's been doing sterling work. Please stand, Kate. Stand work with the microphone for the whole conference. So she leads the Christian Leadership and Service program. Dr. Rob Heimberger, who is here, leads a program that we call Christians in Academia. And in a minute, you will meet Bethan Willis, who could also stand up, who's been involved with different programs over the last few years, but will be heading up something that we hope will be developed called Flourishing in Academia. So do grab them if you would like to speak over lunch. And so each of these cohorts, these formation groups, are focused on personal formation, character development. We intentionally draw students from across a very wide range of disciplines, from a wide range of nationalities, backgrounds, cultures, traditions. We aim to have around 12 in each of those groups. Some are selected, particularly in the Christian groups, on the basis perhaps of roles of leadership that they hold within the community here in Oxford. The rest come from open application, and the applications have been a phenomenal surprise to us. We've had up to 74 applications for 12 places on some of these open groups. And Mike will say much more about our methods in a moment, but essentially these groups meet through the year, discussions, speakers, one-to-one, peer support, mentoring, learning from one another, special events. And the goal is, over time, to build up and to develop a creative and academically rigorous curriculum and methodology for engaging with these students. So, Michael.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can you hear me? Great. As Jonathan said, one of the most unique parts of this project is its focus on postgraduate and professional students. Despite renewed interest in virtue ethics and character education across the universities in the last few decades, very few programs actually focused on postgraduate professional students. Most are focused on children, adolescents, and sometimes undergraduates, but very few on postgraduates or their teachers, leaving this group actually without resources to think about deep moral questions, to think about how their skills might integrate into new careers, and how to match their values personally with their values professionally. These challenges are all the more significant during the period that Jonathan mentioned of emerging adulthood, the stage between ages 18 to 29, which is the time when most students who go to higher education actually pursue their undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. Studies show that among this group, they're marrying later, having children later, holding a higher number of jobs in this period, changing residences more frequently, and pursuing higher education over a longer period of time. And studies show actually that this makes it a very unstable time of personal development with a lot of identity exploration. They want to really figure out who they are and who they want to become. So that really helps us think about what we want to do as a program to actually reach these students in this critical time of development. But since it's not happening elsewhere, how can we actually design a program that actually does meet those important needs in this developmental stage? Of course, postgraduate education hasn't actually been neglected totally. In recent years, in the wake of scandals in government, politics, media, journalism, healthcare, academia, a number of universities and professional associations have developed codes of ethics, honor codes, or codes of conduct to help guide their practitioners. In our larger paper, we kind of analyze these existing methods critically and thoughtfully. We think they're a very important first step at helping raise the importance of ethics in the university. But we think we need to take the next step beyond those basic codes, think about character and how to make these programs more meaningful and also more impactful. So the Character Project here at Oxford seeks to do that by combining research on character with actually a rigorous practical program in its development. So one aspect that makes the Character Project unique is its basis in academic research. In rigorous research, not just in psychology or in philosophy or theology, but in social science and sociology, neuroscience, including from scholars, as you've seen today, who do that work regularly. Christian Miller, Jubilee Center have been major interlocutors for us as we learn how to do this practical program. We also seek to measure our programs as well empirically to assess what's most effective and also to think about how we can improve our program from year to year. So that integration and sort of the learning through the process actually helps us develop the most effective program for the students we actually hope to shape and teach. So to target our program and our assessment of the program, we actually focus on 4 focal virtues. You see them here. Vocation, sense of vocation, commitment to service, gratitude, and humility. These aren't the only virtues, of course, we've talked about over the week, but we focus on these virtues for very detailed reasons. First, these virtues are often shared by a wide range of traditions, moral, religious, philosophical, and thus are important for an increasingly global age, and especially a place like Oxford, which really is bringing students and faculty from around the world from very different cultures and traditions. Second, these 4 virtues cannot be assumed to develop naturally by selecting students or by training them purely in academic subjects. You might expect that they might sort of acquire intellectual virtues, perhaps, or resilience or persistence in the process of doing a master's or a DPhil here at Oxford, but not necessarily humility or gratitude as a byproduct of those things. So I think those are important virtues. Third, all 4 virtues can help move students beyond self-interest and their own personal morality toward ideas of the common good. and we think this is very important, just not only for the virtue itself, but also for many universities who actually make the common good part of their explicit missions, either serve humanity or to actually make an impact through public service. So actually, this kind of program helps students and universities both be directed toward the good in ways that your universities profess their purposes are to be. So it helps universities achieve purposes they actually set for themselves already. Fourth, all virtues respond to the trends we've seen in emerging adulthood. In one poll, for example, 77% of emerging adults said, quote, "This is a time of life for exploring who I really am." In such a time, I think helping students think about a sense of vocation can be a quite important exercise for them as they think about what they want to do beyond their postgraduate life. In similar ways, emerging adulthood has been identified as a largely self-focused age, where individuals are focused on their own development, their own identity, their own aspirations and interests, and thus not as directed toward other commitments that might take them beyond themselves. In such a case, actually committing to service is one way to help sort of chasten or at least balance out that increased self-focus. Also, gratitude and humility have been shown by philosophers and theologians to actually have the same kind of effect on self-focus. Philosophers have held, for example, that gratitude often disposes us to recognize our dependence on the help of others, and in turn makes us more relevant, realize our own limitations and also the need for others' help to achieve certain goals. And humility in turn disposes us to actually recognize those limitations and then turn to others when we need their assistance. So psychology actually calls this an upward spiral between humility and gratitude that studies actually show when you do experiments that the more you increase in gratitude, the more you increase in humility, and it goes through an upward spiral, making us more pro-social in their terms and more eager to actually look outward to others and less to ourselves. So if these trends are important aspects of emerging adulthood, then these four virtues can help provide an antidote to those emerging trends. So in our program, we actually focus on cultivating these virtues by thinking about what Aristotle might do as a philosopher, but also what has been done in the past to actually think about the research in education, philosophy, theology, psychology, and sociology to actually make this research relevant for lives. Not just to study it, but actually to make it relevant for the lives of students here and now where we operate. Jonathan and I explain these methods in detail in a longer paper we'll be publishing, or at least hoping to publish this summer on these methods, but we'll give a brief overview today of how we use these methods in the Global Leadership Initiative, which Ed mentioned. That's the one that actually brings everyone from different traditions together in one common learning community. So Aristotle thought that there are actually 7 methods of character cultivation. We draw on these and develop them in various ways through our program, but the first actually is habituation through practice. We can't learn how to actually be virtuous or to improve our character by simply reading a book, though that can help, or following a blueprint, or applying an abstract formula. We must learn virtues of character in part by doing virtuous actions and by reflecting on those virtuous experiences of doing those particular actions. And so if a trait is to become a habit, an enduring, stable part of our character, it must be acquired through practice, like a skill, playing the piano or learning how to paint, by repeating over and over again certain feelings, thoughts, and actions until they become, as if by second nature, part of who we are. Right? So virtues are part of who we are in a very enduring way. So given that, we encourage habituation through practice by introducing students to various practices they actually can use throughout their program and throughout their time beyond the program, such as friendship, accountability, personal reflection, to improve their character and hold each other accountable to the norms and values they actually set for themselves. And so we also select students who also have experience actually practicing leadership in various contexts or actually occupying roles now in leadership positions as a way to actually apply what they're learning in their own program here to their work outside the program in their own roles as leaders and students in the university. So using practice as a way to actually think about our own experiences, how to learn from those to habituate the right kinds of virtues. This also leads to a second major method of character development, which is reflection on personal experience. If, as Aristotle argues, virtue requires knowledge of why and how we act in certain ways, and if this knowledge comes through repeated performances, habituation of action, then reflection on personal experience is crucial to making sure we reflect on that and act properly in those circumstances. So Aristotle describes the wise person not as the young, he says, but someone of advanced maturity or age, because, quote, the wise see correctly because experience has given them their eye. Right? They see things differently given their own experience of living life both well or badly over their career. So in our careering events and application process, we encourage this personal reflection, asking students to actually reflect on their own experiences in the past to identify virtues that are important for good leadership, or perhaps vices that are relevant for bad leadership. We also encourage students to journal their own experiences throughout the program or share them in our conversations as a way to actually highlight the ways that sharing personal experiences can help open up these new ideas and force us to reflect on our own lives and our own characters. This helps to sort of cultivate the practical wisdom we think is necessary for every virtue and how it's exercised. Of course, in addition to learning our own experiences through reflection, we also learn from others who've had experiences across their lives. So we actually focus on role models and exemplars, which is our third method of character education. Christian mentioned this in his presentation this morning. It's a very important method for Aristotle, who thought we often acquired virtue by emulating those whom we admire or trust. Right? So this is very important for us. Now, they can come in various forms. It could be parents or teachers or peers or coaches or professors or community leaders. They also can be non-living. Right? We can have exemplars as they have from ancient Greece and Rome through history, literature, art, and other forms of discourse that would raise up particular characters as relevant case studies for us to think about how we might actually emulate or reject what they actually embody and enact in their own lives. Scholars now in psychology are trying to figure out how this actually works in our minds. Is it through cognitive processing mechanisms or through emotions of emulation or admiration or elevation, they call it? There's still debates going on about how it actually works, but they all agree it's an important aspect of how we actually cultivate our character, often not even knowing we're doing it. We often actually mirror people's behavior without even realizing actually we're imitating someone whom we admire. So we offer access to exemplars in three different ways. The first is by inviting distinguished speakers to come into our program and share intimate dinner conversations with our students about their own challenges of leadership and character throughout their careers and their lives. We've included speakers, a former MP from the House of Parliament, former university president, a biographer of Nelson Mandela, think tank leaders, and university professors who share their own experiences of leadership in a very real way with our students. And so it's not just a sort of a public lecture, but really a private conversation that really goes deep into the sort of the details of how we think about these important topics in a very sort of applied way. We also provide access to mentors for our students, both a senior leader in their field and also a mentor on our staff who actually can help guide students as they think about these career questions and how they think about vocation and the virtues we have given them to consider. So we've included very influential people from former members of parliament to peace builders and award-winning philosophers and others who are journalists, editors for The Economist and The Guardian both. So a really wide range of people who actually offer to help our students think about how to sort of think about character in their own professional context. So it's been a very effective part of our program so far. Third, we offer access to exemplars through biographies and plays and portraits that elevate characters as examples of good or bad leadership. You see here some programs we actually designed for our students in the Leadership Initiative. We had a guided workshop on King Lear and leadership. After we saw a play from Shakespeare here in Oxford, had a Shakespeare scholar talk about the ways in which Lear and Shakespeare both are trying to play with leadership and a character in a very contextual way within the play. We toured the National Portrait Gallery with a former director to discuss ways portraits of leaders actually shape our imagination, how artists portray individual leaders in different contexts, what we can learn from that artistic and creative imagination. We also had a workshop with a very successful and influential professor of jazz from the Royal Academy in London who talked about the ways jazz quartets lead and follow, improvise, and collaborate in ways that they actually reach a goal without having able to vision in advance, right? It's collective ability to reach without actually having a plan to actually reach it. So these very interesting lessons that come about leadership in different forms from those creative speakers and workshops. We also have an ethics through fiction and film reading group where we actually read novels that grapple with moral complexity in a real way and help highlight the ways in which both the content and form of a novel or a film can shape our moral imagination in very interesting ways. So it's been a great discussion group to have people thinking about ways in which these novels kind of speak to our own times and also to their own times. So these are also a way in which we offer a creative approach through humanities and the arts to leadership and character. Often leadership and character have been confined to Business or politics as being exemplars of what good leaders are. They're very important leaders. We actually build on insights from those discourses. We also think it's really important to actually have a wider range of influence on how we think about what leadership really is. And so we actually have a research initiative this year with the research supports the Research Center in the Humanities here at Oxford called the Arts of Leading. We have students and scholars going together to think about how their own place in humanities can inform their thoughts about what leadership is, and had great speakers who shared their own research on leadership and character, including Sarah Williams, who's one of our chairs yesterday. So a really interesting, creative way to approach these questions that go beyond simply the social scientific or political structures we often associate with leadership. So that we include speakers and readings in our program highlights a fourth method of character cultivation, dialogue, and discussion that Aristotle and Socrates made famous in their own approach to how they do ethical deliberation, to hold each other up to consciousness, to present complex cases and argue about them, and to think about ways we might provide mutual learning, support, and accountability through conversation and the art of conversation. So over the time of our program, we actually have various discussions over about every 2 weeks over the term. We have discussions on various topics from leading and following to leading and failing, and how we respond to failure ourselves, the four vocal virtues, how they actually apply in our lives now, and how institutions actually shape us in various ways we often don't realize, and how these different biases actually might affect our character and therefore our leadership. So that's kind of gets into what we actually doing. That points to the fifth method of our program actually is discussions about implicit biases and institutional incentives, right? Studies have shown recently very effectively how we actually often are shaped by biases and tendencies that we actually don't know we have. And actually these are very important for how we relate to each other and also see ourselves. And so we've actually followed Christian Miller's advice that getting the word out about those biases can actually be an effective way to actually help counterbalance or counteract them. And so we actually have discussions around what are our biases, and what are the practices we actually can use to counteract or to resist those sort of biases to help shape better cultures, whether in universities or in our organizations. And this actually goes back to Aristotle himself. He thought that we could actually correct our tendencies to sort of balance ourselves out from where we grow up, given our culture and upbringing. So to encourage this self-awareness, we invite speakers and have videos and read excerpts that prompt reflection on our own tendencies and biases and the occupational hazards of particular professions, be it academia or finance or law or medicine, and how those professions shape how we think about what leadership actually looks like, and which practices within those institutions can be used to actually shape them directly, and not just be recipients of a culture, but also active agents in actually helping to reform and change that culture as leaders. So this points to a sixth method, which is a very effective way actually of challenging biases in some ways, making norms salient, or maybe using moral reminders, you might call it, helps sort of show the ways in which certain norms are part of who we are as a person or as a community, and making those visible and salient to us in various contexts, either to remind us in certain cases, but also to help sort of set a tone for the culture itself to shape who we are. So throughout our program, we talk about the importance of leadership and character very explicitly. We set expectations for our students around those very important norms. And throughout, we sort of repeat those norms to actually help to inculcate the sort of commitment to these values as being important parts of their own conception about their identity as leaders of character. And so studies actually show that, for example, if you actually talk about helping, for example, before you actually have a study that presents opportunities for helping later on, those who actually were talked about helping beforehand help more than those who had a random topic that they actually talked about. So making norms salient is a really useful way to help build a culture and sort of influence behavior. And this is actually one function of honor codes on campus. We talked already about what honor codes do. They provide rules of conduct, perhaps, that might guide us. Those are important. They also make norms salient, right? They actually give us a sense of we actually are part of the community that actually has these norms and shares these values, and therefore we ought to act in certain ways that help to cultivate that commitment. So by writing it on your exam, for example, when you finish an essay or exam, it's not just sort of a formality. Actually, it's a reminder of us. Actually, we believe it to ourselves to be people who follow this code, and therefore to be doing this work honestly and with integrity. So that's one way in which honor codes actually function within the university context. So we do this through various ways, and I think the last way is really important too. And I think one of the most effective ways to actually make norms salient is through friendship and community. right? The seventh method actually is friendship and community, because it never happens in isolation. Our communities, our friends, our parents, our colleagues shape who we are, for better or worse, in real ways every day, right? So we are, in part, who we are because of our friends. This is Aristotle knew this insight years ago. Actually, he devotes 2 of the 10 books of the ethics to friendship, good and bad forms of friendship. In a recent study from Harvard, over 75 years of analyzing people who went through Harvard, they said that the most important factor in life satisfaction, mental and physical health, career success, was the quality of one's relationships. So friendship really is important as a way of thinking about well-being and also our character. So throughout our program, we actually try to encourage a positive experience of community and friendship among our cohorts. We organize shared meals around a table. We have discussions where we talk about these things, trips. We go to London or elsewhere to talk about issues, as a way to build friendships into that important process, and then also encourage that beyond our time at Oxford, when they get to keep it connected through various social media outlets, but also through various gatherings like this. So it's a really important way to keep that connection going, to provide opportunities for learning and accountability to the norms we all set for ourselves as being important for character cultivation. So those are the kind of norms we actually use and methods we use to actually think about cultivating character, and luckily they've been quite successful so far. So Jonathan can share more about our own measurements, what we've learned from 3 years now of doing this work with these 7 methods.
Thank you, Michael. At the end of the last session on gratitude, Professor Nigel Bigger asked a question about the effectiveness and validity of measurement. I'm trying to work out if I'm grateful for his question. I think I am, because the truth is, at the very least, when it comes to the measurement, we're going to do our best to exhibit humility. We are trying to measure the impact of our program. We think that's important. But we do need to be realistic. So the measurement that we're doing, which I'll talk about in a moment, the purpose, primarily, as I said, our outputs, our outcomes are really about people. The primary purpose of our measurement is to try and improve what we're doing year on year. And we would like to provide some kind of a recognizable evidence base for what we're doing, but we recognize that is much more difficult. The scope of what we're doing in comparison to what we've heard already this morning is tiny, it's very small. So we need necessarily to be modest in our attempts and to recognize that what we're doing is at best exploratory. But we would love to be able to make some kind of a contribution to this wider discourse around the possibility of measuring something like the cultivation of virtue. We would see that as being an important and worthwhile goal. So if we are attempting to measure the impact of our programs, certain things follow necessarily from that. We need some kind of a longitudinal study at the beginning and at the end of the program. We need to compare those who participated in our programs with a control cohort. We are using at least some kind of a very basic mixed methods kind of an approach, which means that alongside the kind of scale questionnaires, which give you some kind of quantitative data, we give out to our students long answer questionnaires, which are intended to provide some more illumination or kind of thickening of what you can get from bald figures. We're not experts in this field. We're not a large team. We didn't have the resources available to us 3 years ago to produce our own measures, and therefore we've done the very common practice of going out there, doing some research, trying to find the measures which are already produced and validated by scientists in the field, which mapped as closely as possible onto these particular focal virtues which Michael has talked about. And so we ended up with these: sense of vocation, brief calling scale by Dick, Aldrich, Stager and Duffy, commitment to service, a self-report altruism scale by Rushton, Christian and Feckin, humility, a scale by Eliot, and gratitude, a scale that was mentioned earlier by McCulloch and Tang. And it is great to say there is a lot of work being done in this field. We're being pointed already towards better humility scales, which we'll probably use in the future. And I think really exceptional work that's been done by Liz and Blair on gratitude. So we don't think we'll have to stay with these, but this is what we've used initially over the first 3 years of our programming. So what was the process of our attempt to measure impact? The 4 instruments, those questionnaires which I just put up on the last slide, we combined all of those together into one 37-item, one 37-question report. And then we added to that the long answer questionnaire to provide some more qualitative data. We put the questionnaire online and allowed people to fill that out at the beginning of their participation, at the end, and for control groups to do it at the beginning and the end of the same period of time, but obviously with no engagement with them in the middle. And we used pseudonyms so that they could anonymously be connected to the question they began with the questionnaire at the end. And the control groups were intended, obviously, to, as far as possible, share the same characteristics and experience as our students, with the exception of not being involved in our groups. I think it's fair to say that the key limitation, there are many limitations we could talk about, from the metaphysical through to the minutiae, but the key one, I think, for us at the moment is that we're working necessarily with very small data sets, because we're working with the students that are in our programs, and so we simply can't kind of scale the research up and have any kind of meaningful understanding. But here is a slide of the global results from 2 years of programming. Our third year of cohorts haven't yet finished. This is all the data that we have to date, but it's not complete, inevitably. So we've had 6 cohorts, if you look, start in the middle column, who completed the program. So we have 60 complete scores, beginning, end, and qualitative. And we've had 2 control groups, which we have a total amount of 11 scores averaged. In the broadest possible sense, beginning scores 133 for our participants, 134 for controls. Final score 139, 132, meaning there is a change in the participant cohorts of 6, which is a mean change of 4% if you take that against the initial starting. So we may talk for a very long time about what that means, what the usefulness of that is, but that's the kind of bald data that we've seen. A small increase in those who participated across these 4 focal virtues against a small decrease in the control groups. And I think small is all that you could possibly imagine. It would be bizarre, wouldn't it, if 24, 25-year-old students were suddenly to leap off the scale in any of these things. So it remains true, very similar if we break it down into the different streams of programming. So the Global Leadership Initiative, the Christian Leadership and Service, Christians in Academia, all come out very similar, and the control groups, as I've already said, break down. And in fact, I could go one slide further than this. I could put all 6 of the participant cohorts and the 2 control groups, and it would be the same for each cohort, each group. It's not true, obviously, for each individual. And we can look at that also by the particular virtues that we're looking at. Very small rise in vocation, which is a really fascinating area we could talk a lot about. A more noticeable rise in service, smaller in humility, higher again in gratitude. We've done a tiny bit, or we've had done by somebody in this room actually, a very little bit of statistical analysis of these results to see if there's anything significant at all. And this was done with even less data than I've just shown you, so it's very, very early. But if we look at the participant cohorts, there is some sort of statistically significant difference between the pre-testing and the post-testing for service and service and gratitude, which, as you saw, were the ones which showed the biggest increase in our measurement. Control groups, nothing significant statistically across any of the virtues. And if we compare our participant cohorts with the control groups, again, comparing those 2 things, you do see significant difference. So I think on the basis of this, we would say we're encouraged. It's kind of what we would like to see. What it really means in practice, I think, is another discussion for another day, but we wanted to present this to you to tell you what we've been doing and what the results have been. I'm going to finish with one slide, really just by encouragement. You can read it as people sort of take their seats up here, but really the qualitative research, the qualitative feedback has been the most exciting and interesting for us. I picked this out of actually the very, very first cohort that went through, but I could find literally dozens that are very similar. How at all have you changed through participation in this program? I felt empowered through this program and now actively consider ways that I can take on a leadership role. This was a GLI member. This is manifested in my external activities, and I find that I'm a better listener and more curious person as a result. The reflective exercises have become a more routine practice in my day-to-day life. I feel now that I understand better how to improve myself and develop my character, for example, through practical wisdom, humility, and acceptance of failure, which is one of the sort of seminars that we run within the program. So, over to you.
Well, thank you very much to Jonathan and to Michael. Now's an opportunity for questions, and particularly focused questions on the academic side that Jonathan and Michael have presented, before we have a panel and a more open conversation from the experiences that will be shared there. So first of all, we go up to the front and to Sarah.
I do understand. I love what you're doing. I love it. I love the way that you give us the qualitative data, human beings as your outcome. I do love that. I do have a question. I understand the Aristotelian model, but for 50% at least of your postgraduate community, feminist theory has a serious problem with Aristotle, not least because it is only the affluent man who can participate in the good life, not the slave or the woman. And through time, gratitude and humility are highly problematic categories for feminist thinking, because they tend to cultivate, through the lens of gender, passivity, quietism, and subordination. And so my question really is, in those 17 years of being in Oxford, yes, I agree, the Oxford male really does need that. But actually, the Oxford women, they need to learn godly courage and wise, bold, courageous leadership. How are you going to navigate that gender dynamic within the research?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll try to take a start at that. I think one really important thing is that it is an Aristotelian view of virtue, not Aristotle's.
Yes.
It's a very important distinction, because actually there's been a lot of updates on those, especially those fronts, in the last few decades, especially. In fact, now most of the virtue ethics in that tradition will be feminist. Actually, often there's feminist virtue ethics now, and so it's very compatible with that kind of account. What it does actually give you a basic framework, how you fill in what are the virtues, what aims they attend to, can include various kinds of inclusive community, and we try to focus in our work. Pragmatically, that looks somewhat different in our program. So we actually have a whole session with Nan Cohane, a very famous feminist political theorist, on gender and leadership, and we talk about these issues very directly. And we try to use ways in which to think about leading and following to bring out gender norms. Often, leaders are seen to be the commanding, controlling person in authority, often a male. And so we actually show the ways in which there are various kinds of leaders, give examples of various kinds of leaders. And one of the most encouraging aspects from our Hong Kong forum, to give one example, a woman there who came from mainland China basically said, I never thought I could be a leader. I thought leader was being someone in a hierarchy. But actually now I come to this program and see that I can be a leader, quote, soft but powerful.
Yes, right.
And so helping them actually think about different forms of leadership is a really important part of what we do here. So we're actually trying to be aware of those differences and also respond to them in creative and constructive ways.
Yes, that's
So I'll just say something about the practical side of it, if I may, which is really to pay tribute to sets of people, two people. One is to Michael. I can't tell you how hard he works on that. So it's slightly distorting here that the research we both do. And if you look at the conference that we've had here over the last few days, the panel on Wednesday, Michael did a huge amount of work to make sure that we're trying to not have the male, middle-aged white male like me represented or over-represented. So that's, I think, Michael does deserve credit for that. Personally, on my team, I'm thrilled to have people who sometimes call me to account on these things and are helping us to think through. And certainly our streams are led. Next year we hope to have 4 streams. 2 will be led by women and 2 by men. So I think hopefully we're trying to address that, but I think it's impossible to overstate how important that is. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Just 2 down.
This is a question for Michael. I'm curious about the move from Oxford to Wake Forest. So my experience with a lot of initiatives like this, it really helps when faculty and staff who have to carry them out are part of the making of it, the developing of it. So as you're moving to Wake Forest, do you anticipate moving this whole cloth, or do you recreate the wheel, or start from scratch? How are you thinking about the next iteration of this in a different context?
Yeah, great question. And it's complex, actually. I think one thing about this project, we actually consulted people from Wake Forest, Christian Miller, another psychologist, actually, as we built our own program here. So there's already been an engagement already across those two partnerships. And so it is very fluid, and we've been working together to make it fluid in that way. I do think that what we've done here is a really good model for how we can do this in universities. I think these methods have seemed to be effective. But also it takes actually building it in a local culture, in a local context, and seeing how different people there are already doing really important work. And so how does it fit? What already happening at Wake Forest? What might be elevated or integrated with other programs? And so for me, I'm just trying to learn a lot right now about what's already happening, how to make it sort of culturally sort of embedded. One advantage of Wake Forest is that it actually has a deep culture already, where the whole person is the focus of our education. I think that makes it conducive to these kind of conversations in ways that really open up its importance. And there's been a lot of work to think about that. And our institutional leaders currently actually really make that commitment. So that's very rare to have a sort of through faculty doing research on it, to institutional leaders like President Hatch and others, Andy Chan here, thinking about how to actually integrate these things into actual curriculum is important. So I'm kind of exploring that now. So I'll have an answer for you next year when you come back to our conference. But it's really exciting to be. And I'm really grateful for the Character Project. We had a great partnership here, and we'll continue that in various ways. So it's been a great way to kind of have these teammates across the Atlantic thinking about these very important questions.
Further questions? Let's keep going back. Into the middle, yeah.
Thank you. This is fantastic stuff. I'm very encouraged by your program. Michael and I were in grad school together, or at least we coincided for a year together, and it's great to see the work he's doing. I have a comment to the question. The comment is, when you talk about measuring the impact of your program on its participants, I think that when you use quantitative measures, there's a risk that you could either distort or understate the impact. Because when you think about it, the influence of a teacher, a mentor, an important leader in your life, it can be quite subtle. And in many ways, it may be many years later that you fully realize that influence. And it may change your mindset, it may change the way you see certain things, the way you think about things. But a survey in which you collect data and ask people certain questions and measure it on a graph may in fact not capture many aspects of that. And so in order to do full credit to your work, perhaps to emphasize the limitations of those quantitative measures. And the second thing is just a quick question about follow-up. These people who go through your programs, as you say yourself, they go on to different parts of the world, different professions. They don't necessarily stay in academia. And I think this is a typical problem with a lot of these ethical formation programs in universities, is that the people who participate in them go on, and there's very little follow-up, and they can often feel quite isolated later in their workplace from those practices. And so I'm wondering, have you given thought to the ways in which potentially you could help to stay in touch with these people later, and maybe even provide some kind of support or programming for them later on in their careers?
Thank you. That was an excellent comment initially, which I think we agree with 100%. And in terms of the question, we absolutely are starting to look at what can we do into the future with these sort of alumni, for want of a better word, of our programs. So sitting here now, talking about a project which has been running like for 3 years, it seems like a long period of time. Having been through those 3 years, it's gone in a flash. And so we only really have the first cohorts going out now, and we're only beginning to think intentionally about following up. But I think we very much hope to do that using the remarkable sort of information technology which is available in the world today, and the ways in which you can begin to build communities virtually. And then to use various networks to which we have access to try and actually physically connect people in different parts of the world. And so some very exciting things like having Samson here, who you'll meet in a moment, from Hong Kong, Michael now obviously in Wake Forest. As that network grows, I think it may become more possible to actually physically connect people, but we would certainly see that as being hugely important, something we would want to invest in. The challenges with this kind of an emerging adult community at these kinds of institutions, when they go, they really go, and they could be anywhere. But it's important.
Just next to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm with a part of the civil program in Slovakia. We are now in our 8th academic year, so I really understand that you struggle. We also struggle. Mostly with measurements. We've got now 140 alumni, so there's still like good experience behind, but still a lot of things to do, and we struggle also with like how to measure what is the impact of the alumni. What is it? Is a mother which is at home with the child a good leader or not? So these are the questions I would like to share later. But I got the question: do the students live together, the community, or not? And is this a full-time program or a part-time program? Or how much time does it take for a student? Can a student be also a student at the university, or should I do it as a gap year?
Good. Yeah, I mean, one challenge we have with Oxford postgraduates, they're also postgraduates. They're at a very full-time course. They're doing intense research, intense lab work, intense coursework, and so we've been very mindful about being careful with their time, making sure it's quality time we actually engage them, but also having limits on it. So we've usually had an event every 1 to 2 weeks to do this. It's an optional program. They actually apply to do it, so they're all invested in it. We actually signal that's an important commitment to make. If you're going to be part of this, we want you to actually be committed to it. And so it is an optional program, voluntary. And my sense is that it's been about the right mix so far. I think we've kind of adapted it, adding a session here and there, but it seemed like the right kind of fit.
Yeah, so we'll pick that up. Perhaps Hugo Vinton might be able to talk to that when we have the panel in just a moment. But that's a really good, helpful question. Yeah, there was one more further back as well, and we'll come back to something at the front. But, yeah.
Thank you very much. I applaud what you're doing and the efforts over the past 3 years to make this a successful program. I just have one question, maybe. I think Professor Bigger's presentation got close to it when he spoke about his experience at the University of Chicago in the Divinity School, when he would have, say, individual theologians presented, but not some kind of systematic framework. I heard that a little bit in what you were saying, not theologically speaking, but the effort, say, to teach the whole person at Wake Forest. Certainly the question of the student, that very probing and searching question, who am I, really gets at this, the whole person. Or what you spoke about, Michael, about identity being so critical to these students. So I wonder, is there any effort in the virtue side or on the character building side to address something about human sexuality, proper aims and ends of this? It's such a fundamental part of the student experience. One study shows that up to 90% at some universities will engage in sexual relations outside of any kind of a marital context. Is this just off bounds? I don't want to make the question sound naive, but if we're really talking about the whole person, Professor Bigger said that he didn't have throughout his whole University of Chicago experience any individual, I can't remember how he phrased it, but specific issue that was addressed. Maybe something like ethically thinking through abortion, for example. Is there any kind of character formation in what you're trying to do? Again, I'm not trying to be naive about the question.
Sure,
It's
sure.
very sensitive, but it's so fundamental to, it seems like,
Thanks.
Yeah,
character formation.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we have a very, you see that methods we have, they're very broad methods, and the discussions themselves are very broad, in part actually because we have a very diverse student body we're actually working with in that context, each with their own kind of identity and each questions, and so we'll try to actually create a space for those explorations without having one topic necessarily be a topic we actually engage. We do have times we talk about those questions, about how norms attach in certain ways to leadership or character, what virtues are relevant for us, what leading and following looks like in certain cultural contexts that may be different from our own. And so we're trying to engage those questions, but without having sort of be a topical base. I mean, one thing we found, one thing that most programs do currently when they do education or ethics is they focus on hard cases, either difficult social issues or difficult kind of moral dilemmas. Now, those are really important. They're also pretty rare in our everyday lives. We often don't face those conflicts daily, but we face cultures and communities and practices every day. And so we're trying to focus on the actual character and practices that actually we sort of face every day, and given a framework for how we understand and explore and navigate those.
I'd love to answer more questions. Can you just hold for 5 for a moment? What we're going to do now, we'll have a panel and then we'll come back for half an hour of questions. If there are particular questions pertaining to the discussion we've just had, we'll give an opportunity for those at the end. But why don't we move on to the panel now? So please thank Jonathan.
Thank you all.
So please sit down. Can I invite our panellists to step up?
They're on the both on so I guess maybe.
Okay, so here wonderfully we have 4 people who have been involved in different aspects of the work of the Oxford Character Project over the past 3 years, and I'd like to introduce them briefly and then we'll hear something from each of them, a bit of discussion up front, and then again we'll open up to questions. So first, closest to me, Dr. Yiga Ma is a postdoctoral fellow at the Environmental Change Institute here at Oxford. She's a graduate at Tsinghua University in Beijing, has travelled, worked and studied widely around the world. Her DPhil here was in energy policy regulation in China and India, and she was a part of the very first cohort of students for the Global Leadership Initiative when we just got going back in 2015. So Yiga, it's lovely to have you. Dr. Vincent Cheng, next to Yiga, is a clinical research fellow here at the Oxford Institute of Radiation Oncology. Vinton is himself a medical doctor with degrees in biomedical engineering and medical science and experience on the front line of medical practice as a registrar in oncology for several years. And Vinton was a member of the second of the Global Leadership Initiative cohorts, also a student participant, and has himself joined then in delivering some programming as we were able to collaborate in Hong Kong quite recently. And Vincent was part of that team, speaking and facilitating the discussions amongst students there. In Hong Kong we are working, and we're very grateful that Professor Samson Say has been able to come over and to join us this week and being a participant here at the conference. Samson is the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. He's a Professor of Mental Health in the Department of Social Work and Social Administration. His current work focuses a lot on experiential learning. And as I say, we were there at Hong Kong and were wonderfully and warmly welcomed just recently and had the chance to collaborate, taking a kind of short form of some of the programming that we've been able to do here and try to think about what that might look like in a Hong Kong context, and deliver the first go at that really in a very short form of a short leadership forum which we called The Character of Leadership for around 40 Hong Kong University undergraduates, and a tremendous time. But Samson, we're delighted you're here and look forward to you sharing something of that. Thank you. Dr. Bethan Willis, finally at the end, is part of the team of the Oxford Character Project, along with Rob Heimberger, who's here at the front, co-leading some of the one of the streams called Christians in Academia, part of this work that we've been doing, particularly for the Christian community and character formation there. So Bethan's been involved on that side. And going forward, Bethan will also be developing programming on character formation kind of more widely into the university, then again another open stream, which we're calling Flourishing in Academia. And here the idea is to try to reach students who perhaps wouldn't self-identify so easily with the leadership tag, and we firmly believe in our understanding of leadership that those students will be leaders in different contexts, but in order to engage them, they perhaps wouldn't stick their hand up and come to a leadership discussion or program on character formation, but might be interested in something more widely ranging. So Flourishing in Academia is our way of going to be a way of addressing that, and Bethan is here, and we're very grateful to you to join us too. Let's just start then straight in, if that's possible, and hear perhaps something from the different experiences that the panellists have had as students, as partners. Yiga, you were involved in the first cohort, as we said at the very beginning. How would you describe your own experience as part of that group, and how important was that to you?
Okay, thank you, Ed. Thank you everyone for coming. It was a very inspiring experience. At the same time, it was very useful. To say something about postgraduate students in Oxford, especially international students. From the outside, the postgraduate students at Oxford look very privileged, very elite. But from inside, it's a really, really anxious group. of people. Apart from the very intensive research, intensive study program we have to deliver and accomplish every day, we also face increasingly scarce job opportunities, increasingly precarious work conditions for high-skilled workers, not only in the UK but globally. So for postgraduate students, we face problem not only in academia but also thinking about what kind of career we need to do. In postgraduate studies, we learn to solve the world's problems, learn those very sophisticated, complicated analytical skills. But by the end of the day, we need to survive. We need to feed ourselves, support the family, support our community in the first place. So I started participating in Global Leadership Initiative precisely in this very anxious period of my career. I was finishing up my DPhil, trying to think about what kind of career I want, what kind of life I want. And participating in the Global Leadership Initiative not only provide me with a platform, a space, a mental space to think about things, about vocation, avocation, humility, career in out of the box, because every day we have to deal with so many problems. But also, I think the most useful and most important experience for me is the mentorship program. I was mentored with a very senior academic leader who had diverse experience in different kind of leadership positions in academia, in policy making, in economics. And I posed him 3 questions during our first meeting. I asked, first of all, because I am from China, mainland China, and I pursued an international career in studies and in consulting. But when I was finishing up my DPhil, I was having the first problem is how to balance your international career with your commitment for your homeland. And this, my mentor, he had a similar experience, not necessarily from the same cultural contact, but similar problem. Like he had very diverse international experience, but at the same time he also made significant contribution for his homeland. And the second question is about how do you balance being a generalist and being a specialist? Because in Oxford, we increasingly ask students, postgraduate students and researchers to be interdisciplinary, while at the same time the academic criteria, the institutional criteria is still very disciplined. And in a word, when you look for jobs beyond academia, it's also not that interdisciplinary. So I was asking that because this mentor I had, he was a specialist in economics, but at the same time was a journalist in development problems and solve a lot of the work puzzles in a very, with large groups, with experts from different cultures, different disciplines. And the third question I asked was, how do you balance between being academic and at the same time being a practitioner, because it was for their generation, the mentor is very senior. For their generation, it seems like it was possible to combine your academic research with career in policy, in business. But today, in the world we are facing is that for every job you want to compete, you compete with another 200 people. When I was competing for Oxford GRF or Oxford's postdoctoral fellowship, you compete with 200 people. You need to be really, really good in this academic research. At the same time, you feel like you run out of your strengths to think about the broader world. So that was like a real questions we as postgraduate students face, and it was a great chance for me to listen to the real leaders, the real life experiences, and I think the most important lesson I learned from this was that my mentor was telling me a lot of his career choice, a lot of his life choices was not planned at all. You had to have something to help you navigate through the up and downs in life, and the world changes, your life circumstances changes, and in the end it is the virtue your character will help you to cope with this world with high uncertainty and to accomplish your ambition and to benefit for the society. So that's briefly my experience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Down to Vincent. So you had, Vincent, a fair bit of experience already in the workplace and in medicine in the hospital before you came. How does your experience as part of the Oxford Character Project relate to that wider experience you've had already?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ed, for the question. So I was very fortunate, having newly come out of medical school, to participate in a leadership program, actually, as a emerging clinical leader network. And it's really through the challenges of trying to enact change within the medical hierarchy that inspired me to apply for the Oxford Character Project. And also there was a concern and fear, and I think that's not just in myself, but also prevailing within the medical profession, that the training has become one of jumping through hoops and career progression and being turned into a metric rather than really focusing on our core values, which is caring for patients and serving the public. And so the idea that came through from the GLI that kind of really stuck with me was the idea of servant leadership, and thinking about it as a leader, not as one who's standing in the front, but one who's actually from behind, directing and supporting those. And I think it's really inspired me to want to kind of return back to the medical practice, because coming to Oxford was almost like a break for me, to a change, and to kind of rediscover kind of my love for medicine. To become one of an advocate for not just for people who have less voice within the medical field, not just the patients, but also junior staff, people with less experience, and I do that, ensuring that it becomes one of teaching and training. And I think that's something that I'm really looking forward to going back to. Also, more importantly, I've also not only become more self-reflective, but I feel that I have a greater understanding now of the influences around me, not just the people, but also the institutions, how that has affected my practice in ways that I could potentially influence that back. But also, I believe that I've become better able to scrutinise people who I see as leaders, and hopefully be able to hold them to account as well in the future.
Thank you, Samson. It was a wonderful delight for us to be able to come over to Hong Kong and partner and work with you. Perhaps you could share something from your perspective of that Character of Leadership Forum and what you hope might come out of it.
Well, Ed, I think I want to say it feels very cool here, sitting among the young people. So it's fabulous. I want to repay your generosity, firstly by saying thank you, but also being here and thinking about character and virtue. I really want to say, going back to my Christian tradition, that I'm a sinner, and have mercy on me, because when you think about character, when you think about virtue, it goes back a lot to who we are, and also in this case who I am. And being in Oxford gives me a very precious space to do exactly that. The Hong Kong experience represents a couple of things. Number one is a switch from your existing program from focusing on postgraduate to undergraduate. And number two, you transport from your sort of extended time program to a window opportunity we had in Hong Kong, which is only 1.5 days, literally. So we undertook all those changes and to modify the program. What I would like to do very briefly, Madam and sirs, if you don't mind, ladies and gentlemen, just want to say very briefly, we had 40 people applying the program from social sciences where I'm based, and also beyond. We had about 60, 70 people applying for the program, and they all have to write a personal statements in order to get through. I want to let you know it's not a rubber sort of stamp, because we did have individuals, we went back and say, look, your personal statement is rubbish, go away and write more. Seriously, we had a couple of individuals, we dealt with that in that light. With the 1.5 days program, we had pre-program reading. I am glad to tell you the self-report reading completion rate is about 62%. meaning people report they read about 60% of the given reading. We had drama, we had movie, we had a mini lecture, we had panel of leaders from banking industry, we have the president coming to share his experience, we have group discussion reflecting on the readings and so forth. So basically, and also we feed them well, that is important. At the end of the evaluation, I want to let you know, out of 5, the evaluation is anything between 4.2 and 4.6. In the Hong Kong U context, it's pretty phenomenal. So we are pleased with that. But not only the score, as comments by my esteemed colleagues earlier, the writing of their reflection is very enthusiastic. They enjoy the program. They can name specifically what impact on them. And a couple of young people saying, look, if you come back, I want to help. So that really shows the level of enthusiasm. Lastly, I want to share with you what I consider as apparently working quite well. Number one is with a forum like this, we are able to assemble a group of very what we call like-minded young people. The second thing is I think they really enjoy the reading and also the leaders and also how well prepared our speakers were. Both speakers from Oxford and also the local speakers we were able to invite. And then I think another sort of what makes it work, I should say, is yet to be seen because after the event, I had 2 people coming to say, look, Samson, I want to do something similar, if not bigger or better, in Hong Kong U. And also, I think as Ed, you hint earlier, we are very determined. We love to start a Facebook group, and to carry on the discussion among the young people. So to sum it up, I think the translation from your postgraduate to undergraduate, your term time year-based program to a window opportunity appears to strike the chord very well. Thank you.
Thanks, Samson, very much. And down to Beth, and so I guess so far we've majored in our presentation on the activities which are intentionally aimed to include students from any you will know the philosophical or faith tradition. But we've also developed, as the Oxford Character Project, some programming particularly for the Christian community, which I said you've been involved with and led. Perhaps you could talk about that just a little bit. How does that differ from the kind of university-wide, maybe open character formation program?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think that beginning with a kind of common tradition and a set of beliefs, and particularly in having a shared understanding of the end result, that is in Jesus Christ, and that we're aiming at Christ-likeness, and that shapes the discourse and our discussions fairly significantly, I think. So that's probably the key difference. Other things I think that we try to do, we obviously use more theological sources, although we mix up our reading materials as well. So we like to draw on kind of literary and other sources as well. The New York Times op-eds are excellent for this kind of stuff, David Brooks. So yeah, we use a range of sources, but there will tend to be a theological source in every discussion that we have. And again, that shapes what we say and gives a particular flavour and focus. And I think also that one of our goals in the programme is to help students integrate their faith in their academic life, not to see these as 2 separate spheres, but to see a common purpose between what they're understanding in their church communities and personal lives and what they see as their goals and aims in their academic life and career as well.
Thank you. We'll open up in a second, but wonder if we might develop a little further and perhaps consider, we've just come to the end of a 3-year kind of initial kind of pilot phase, if you like, of the programming, and very much now hoping to go beyond, to establish increasingly here and institutionally in Oxford, but also in significant partnerships where that's possible with others in different places. Vincent, you've clearly, I think it's a sign that you've benefited from personally, you said, but also that you've invested in you. You came out to Hong Kong and gave your time, and here you are as well. What do you see and what do you think the potential is for this kind of programming?
Yeah, it was fantastic to be able to go to Hong Kong and see it happen from the other side, not being a student, as being someone facilitating it. And I think it really goes back to what Jonathan was saying about building a community, we as a group within my cohort, I really felt we came close. We were able to share things, personal stories that perhaps we wouldn't have shared outside of that, and be able to discuss and reflect on that within a very deep setting. And then to be able to take that forward to these new students, it was an undergraduate cohort, and was really heartening actually. And I think I have to go back to a question that Claire raised on Wednesday as a devil's advocate. Is it possible for students to, graduate students in particular, to unlearn, or for us to fix perhaps poor behaviours? And the way that I see it, it's not about deconstructing and then reconstructing the character, but about changing the flow and the direction, so building on experiences that people have had in the past. And this is something that all of us can do. It was about being equipped with some of the tools to think about virtues and character, and this was something that I felt that we were able to pass on. And what really surprised me was how candid everyone was during the discussions and the thoughtful discussions that we had amongst a group of strangers that had never met before and that we'd never met before. And it really showed how deep these kind of conversations are happening within ourselves, and it was less about us directing them in terms of what we wanted them to say, and more about allowing them a forum and a space to be able to share that. And I think it's also really heartening to hear what Michael said about the student who talked about changing the narrative from being quiet and towards being powerful. And I think, again, kind of going back to previous questions, it is about changing the narrative. Associating quiet. I mean, I remember as a medic, when I was in an interview, I was asked what are one of my weaknesses, and I mentioned, well, I've been told that I'm quiet and softly spoken, and then said, yes, that's true. That is the case. And I think it was within myself seeing it as a weakness. Yes, quiet can be associated with timid and weak, but also it can be associated with calm, thoughtfulness. And I think within myself, I had kind of changed that narrative, and thinking about within my medical career, the people who have inspired me the most have been ones who have been calm, able to be calm within kind of quite desperate situations. And so it was really heartening to hear that narrative has changed. I hadn't actually mentioned that. I wanted to say that actually when I was in Hong Kong, but clearly the process itself allowed the student to kind of come up with that themselves, and I think that's really really powerful to hear.
Thank you. Samson, or you could, anything to say in terms of your hopes in Hong Kong, or perhaps amongst Chinese students going forward?
Yeah, for China, I think China now is definitely increasingly integrated into the global community in everything. Academia, research, business, of course, and all the other economic and political cultural development. For Chinese, as a Chinese student, I was a Chinese student. Now, as a young Chinese scholar studying and pursuing my research in the West, I have always been confronted with the question that who is the best representative of the image of China? And it used to be the Chinese companies, it used to be the big campaigns we have, or in the word of propaganda, if you prefer. But now increasingly, I feel like in our worker community, in international project collaborations, in international development projects, it's more and more the image of the young Chinese, their character and their way of doing things and their way of collaborating with international partners are really representing the image of China today. So for that, I think as Chinese students and young scholars, it's very important for us to have this space to think about it. Apart from cultivating our analytical and technical skills. So I would like to see more and more collaborations between China and Oxford in terms of character development, virtue cultivation. As part of my work, I am with Tim here developing a partnership between some Chinese top universities with Oxford in terms of sustainable development. and we are trying very hard to incorporate leadership and character to be part of this partnership, and we hope to see more and more of this kind of thing happening.
Samson, did you want to?
Well, I have three hopes. Number one, I want to see the program not just a bubble phenomenon. There will be a sustainability, there will be a structure, there will be a home for the program rather than anchoring nowhere. Number two, I want the discourse and discussion will go beyond the students' community, because I think faculties, staff, and everyone, I think we need to examine this issue squarely. We should not sort of shy away from issues like that. And then the last one is, as you present earlier, I like to think the Hong Kong U or other locations or institutions will also contribute to the discussion and debate about character and virtue. We are able to extend the images, the icon, the metaphor, the stories beyond the so-called Western paradigm. I like to contribute to the bigger data set, the international data set, the longitudinal data, and so forth. I think those are my hopes. Thank you.
Thank you. Just finally, one more question before we open it up again, and that's to Bethan. Perhaps you could say a little bit more, Bethan, about this development, this new cohort that we're hoping to start on flourishing in academia.
Sure, yeah. So I think flourishing in academia, the goal would be to make a space for people who don't see themselves as leaders, but certainly will have spheres of influence using their academic gifts and abilities. And so I think part of that would be about helping them to recognise what those spheres of influence are and the responsibilities that go along with them. So whether that's in terms of teaching, opinion forming, spending time with colleagues or students or in the lab, helping them to recognise that the influence that they have and the responsibilities that go with them. Then I think also there's the opportunity there to have facilitate broad conversations on moral questions. We've had real fun doing that with the Christians in Academia group. So one particular incident that sticks in my mind was a conversation around the ethics of AI and new technologies. And so with a diverse group who are all have an interest in the common good and kind of moral and virtue, questions of virtue, there's real opportunity there to have great conversations. So we had an anthropologist talking about unemployment and work and how that relates to AI, a psychologist talking about the kind of mental health aspects of employment and unemployment, and then the people who are actually working on forming these new technologies really had some perspectives to consider and take away with them, and it was a really great discussion. So I think that in this group we'd hope to facilitate more of those discussions. And then finally, I think helping students to identify the presumptions and norms in their discipline that may go unquestioned. That was brought up yesterday. So giving them space to question those, and again through matching with mentors, particularly they can have space to think about alternatives as well. So that's the goals.
Thank you very much. So back now to questions. If you had a hand up at the end of the last session, then over to Joseph. Yeah.
Very much. So, I wanted to use this opportunity to achieve two things. One, to express my personal gratitude to those of you who are involved in the Oxford Character Project. Generous colleague, Chris Sagden, shared this information with me and expressed interest. I think somebody in your team said I would come as a guest, and it's been well worth it. Just wanted to say thank you to you all. But the second thing is to make a comment which hopefully can encourage you. And this is arising out of the last session when Michael and Jonathan were giving us two sides, including sharing the methods that have been utilized, as well as the summarized results. This is growing out of a deep commitment and an appreciation I personally have in looking at behavioral transformation, because my research for the past 7 years, or for the 7 years that I was involved in working on my doctoral studies here,
doing in part-time was actually focused on behavior change in the area of HIV and looking at transforming people's responses. And I was able to find very amazing results, empirical data, done quantitatively and qualitatively, a triangulated approach in the specific area that I researched. It was amazing to see an 80% reduction of new infection. And it was an unconventional approach because I used moral and religious teaching, assessing the impact of this particular message. And I specifically looked at the efficacy of abstinence and marital fidelity, helping persons to change their lifestyle and be able to respond. And so I'm just saying this to say that even though your results look minimal, at least you're looking at somebody who took on an unconventional approach, as humbly as possible, trying to generate evidence and to learn whether we can deliver healthcare, life-saving approaches differently. And I'm glad that it's given me courage to actually discover empirically that we can take courage in a new area and be able to make a change. So this is a step towards possibly helping us all to show commitment to the global society that we can create a more virtuous society. But if we can do it with evidence, with rigor, and with an intention to make a contribution to humanity, we're in the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, up at the back.
Hi, I'm just a postgrad student for Illinois, but I'm asking this question primarily as an ethnic Chinese, so obviously it interests me that through from different ethnic places as well. Just off the top of it, I'm just seeing parallels between the Aristotelian framework with the Confucian culture. I'm just wondering whether, when we're talking about adapting to different contexts, there is something about, people groups that come from the Confucian culture that makes the transferability of the great project easier. And obviously we have to really think about context because I'm thinking, look at where I'm currently pursuing my research in Durham, for example, there are different challenges, different contexts we're facing. So, yeah, it's a brainstorming question. Just thinking, with this 3-year pilot study, do you find that, when you're approaching people with certain cultures, like the Confucian culture, which somehow perhaps provides a more fruitful soil for thinking about virtue and character than those, or those from a Christian context, for example, who've been brought up in habits of spiritual formation. It's easier trying to promote something like the character project, whereas if you're thinking about young people who've been brought up in a very different sort of culture, who are just not used to talk about character or virtue, or have got some presuppositions and prejudices about such terms, you're going to have a much more difficult time there. Thinking about it forward in the future, how would you want to deal with those more difficult contexts?
Thanks. I know Michael's done some teaching on that, work on that, and others have probably got comments to share as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. We also did research on how these different traditions that think about virtue and character and different practices of virtue and character. Often our readings, even in Oxford, actually include readings from other traditions, right, including Confucian traditions and others around these questions. So we really think it's important for everybody to actually engage these traditions, think about the diversity there for their own development, also their own literacy of other traditions as a very important part. And in Hong Kong, actually, we actually changed our program explicitly, actually, to add many more readings from the Confucian tradition. And actually talked about the ways different people from different countries actually thought about the word leadership, how to even translate into language the word leadership from different countries. That was a very interesting conversation for us. So we really, our Trinity context, want to actually make it develop it in that context very carefully and thoughtfully in that way. So I take your point totally and agree with you. Thanks.
Samson, do you have any
Just briefly, culture is one thing, but also the context is another. And I think what I learned one thing from this 1.5 days conference, among a lot of other things, is talking about character and virtue is a very good starting point. But there are still some difficult issues you and I need to front up with. And those issues vary as the context. So it's important. Thank you.
I think so. Obviously, as soon as you create a program, you have to start with something. So you draw some boundaries. But I think just going back to what we think we're getting out of the feedback and the measurement is this iterative sense of, well, this is something which is moving and living, and we're really actively developing, and so taking lots of these difficult questions into account. Yeah, there was some others hands up at the front here. Yeah.
First a comment and then a question. I would really recommend measuring further out in time, because most of us anecdotally can remember back 5, 10, 15 years that thoughts that come to us from specific experiences. But my question was around the method, and the fact that the method really is a system. And so like all systems, there's an Archimedes point for leverage coming into the system to see which cluster of variables impact folks more versus others. And I was wondering, I know it's quite early, but after you get enough data, it'd be quite interesting to look at people's baseline test, then have them reflect on which part of this had the most impact upon them, and over time begin to see patterns if you can emerge, so you'd understand when people entered into this, what might be most important for them in terms of shaping their outcome. Any thoughts about how you might be able to measure that over time, or what that might look like?
Jonathan, or Michael?
You're up. No, we talk about that a lot actually in our qualitative survey. We actually have some questions about that. We've drafted. It's hard to do that with the measurements on the quantitative part, given that scale we use. We're open to actually figuring out the best ways to measure it. So I think that's one important we thought about already. I think extending the length of the measurements is going to be very important over a lifetime, not just over this 1-year program.
Yeah, I think just to say, it would be hard to overstate our lack of expertise. But we are obviously increasingly partnering, not least with people in this room. So I think as our kind of data set builds, clearly we'll be thrilled to try and find more knowledgeable partners to help us actually get some useful information out of that.
Yeah, Adam in the middle.
Thanks. I think it's an amazing project, as you know. I'm kind of really on the question from start there. One of the things that got me thinking about a bit was about selection. And in particular, I really like the starting quote, which is Oxford produces leaders and thinkers. But actually, of course, what it does is a small percentage of everyone who comes out of Oxford every year becomes a genuine leader in the sense of have real impacts in the world. And of those people, probably quite a large proportion of them wouldn't necessarily automatically be intrigued by something like this. So I'm just wondering if the aim is to produce genuine good leaders, how do you think about who you select and reaching out to those who perhaps if I think back to my university days, for people who are most likely to go and become very influential at the Oxford Union, doing other things and not necessarily this would immediately appeal to them.
So we focus amongst the postgraduate community, and we've had small cohorts that we've been showing us in this pilot phase. And actually, the issue's been almost too much interest. So it's been wonderfully encouraging to have 75 kind of full applications, which takes some effort to submit. But that then leads us in this position where we're having to say no to lots of students, making kind of almost arbitrary decisions between excellent students as to who we include. We need to think harder at this as we go forward, certainly as we can make the programs more open. We've developed particular relationships with different parts of the university, so there's a lot of interest, as you guess you'd imagine, in a leadership-focused program from students at the business school and the government school. We've also tried to make sure there's a diversity in the cohort, and then tried to intentionally reach beyond those groups, make sure they're not overrepresented, such that we are reaching into medicine and engineering and English literature and language and right across. At the moment, we've almost got, for what we've been able to deliver, we've had too much interest, so we haven't had to kind of think so intentionally, but I think we'll need to, if we're able to do more, we'll need to think along those lines very much, yeah. There's one down.
Thank you very much for all you guys are doing. It's just incredible work. I'm Andy Chan from Wake Forest, so we're closely with Michael and with Nathan. One of the questions I had is, You're working with a very small cohort of students. One of the points that Christian made this morning was about going to faculty and staff. And I was curious whether, one, you thought through whether you will expand what you're doing to faculty and staff in some way, what that might look like. And then probably the other thing is related to what Christian said is you landed on a certain set of focal virtues. Michael, as you think about Wake Forest, do you imagine you will expand those focal virtues given how Wake Forest is wired, and what's your initial thoughts on that?
To be perfectly honest, we haven't, I think it's fair to say, before this conference thought at all about faculty and staff at the university having been busy with the pilot stage, as Ed was saying. I think this has been a fascinating sort of opportunity to start to think more of the university as a living institution, where clearly the faculty and the staff, whether that's the staff who are serving us our food here through those who are teaching, are obviously the core, the life of that university. So if you want to have an impact, cultivating virtue, clearly you probably need to be thinking more broadly than we do. Clearly, again, it's hard to overstate that this grew out of a particular, as it happens, Christian chaplaincy working with a particular community, the postgraduate community. But I think we've been encouraged by the sort of purchase that it has, that it may be possible to look to take that in other directions. But thank you.
And I do think the approach of starting small and building up is quite pragmatically useful, both for the people doing programming, but also the students to get that kind of sort of collection of virtues. We focus on the four here, vocation, service, humility, gratitude. I think those are great virtues, especially for this age group of students. I think even we're going to talk about expanding it here in this group actually to honesty and also to practical wisdom, because you need those two virtues. Practical wisdom actually exercise any virtue well, if it's appropriate or not appropriate in certain contexts. Gratitude, for example, requires that kind of practical wisdom to do it well. And honesty especially, both because the university is committed to honest inquiry and honest engagements across different subjects. So I think that's very important for us. But also in a time, I think, where truth has been sort of cast doubt on in our discourse, post-truth discourse. And so what does it mean to actually be truthful or be honest or to see the facts as being relevant considerations for how we think about our world? So I think those would be two I would add. And also I think as we go on, we can add others. I think justice is an important virtue, not just as a systematic it's an institution, but actually a personal virtue. How do we give others their due, given who they are and what they bring to us? I mean, also I'd say courage. To do all those things, you also need kind of moral courage, especially when you have a lot of peer pressure in universities to do things that may not be right, or they don't have courage to actually stand up to those things and hold people accountable. So how do you actually teach courage as a necessary virtue for pursuing justice and honesty and these other virtues? So I think those would be the ones I would sort of think about next. But I think it really is contextual and depends on what each culture brings to a place.
Do you mind if I stand up, because I just want to show you a couple of things. First, easy, that's just to remind me to stay brief. I think that's intended for the speakers. The second is, would you get hold of your copy of that and just have a quick look at the front of it? I'm just interested that nobody's made any reference to your logo at the front during the talks, and yet I think it's an extraordinarily important one. So my comments really are a reflection on the 2 days, but with reference to some of the things that have been said. My name is Jeremy Clare. I want to use a sort of theological lens, but I'm not a theologian. My background is as an army officer for 27 years, and then I was a career coach, helping people make good decisions about the future. That's my background, but I've studied a bit here, including in Oxford. My comment's really about roots. I was really grateful to Jonathan, I think it was, who said quite clearly and unambiguously, this grew out of a Christian chaplaincy. In other words, acknowledge the roots of this program, unambiguously. Now we can use the word theology and Christian faith, and some people would regard them as interchangeable and others as completely different. But my first question yesterday, when we started out with Chad, was really making a comment on the fact that theology was being cast in the role of a sort of a constraint to freedom, something that was controlling the academic program and needed to be freed from that. We've also talked about it as a distinct academic discipline, of course. It's also a facilitator or an explanatory mechanism for many of the things that happened. And I said to Christian this morning, I was surprised that he was surprised, if you like, at the honesty problems over cheating. Why are we surprised? There's a Christian doctrine called original sin. We have a tendency in that direction. Why would we be surprised when people breach the laws and so on? So I'm speaking really as someone who is a Christian believer, just reflecting on the fact that that picture is very important to me. I believe the roots, if you like, of all that's worthwhile, the taproot of that tree on the front of it, for our civilization here in this country, the taproot's Christian, Judeo-Christian. The principles, if you like, that govern our financial, our judicial, our commercial, and our educational processes are all Christian. And I want to say it, as it is. That's what I believe. And I think most of you would acknowledge that fact, whether or not you're a believer. That's the roots. The motto of the City of London is Domine, Dirige, Nos. In other words, finance, commerce, but the motto is Lord direct us. It's an acknowledgement, if you like, of our roots. And I suppose all I really want to say is that let's not fall into the trap of just talking about theology, but where it's appropriate and when it's appropriate to acknowledge the roots of what we're talking about, both personally and in general discussion. And I've honestly found that nowhere where I've been able to speak openly about what I believe have I found anyone offended in the sort of politically correct sense by just stating what you believe and asking what they believe and making comparisons, discussion and so on. I do understand that the roots are not solely Christian, and that there are many other strands to our history and our academic life, but I do believe the taproot needs to be acknowledged, and what changes might be wrought if the Christian roots are acknowledged, named as such, fed and watered and cultivated in the way we do normally with trees. Incidentally, with a tree, if you cut off the taproot, the tree dies. Whatever you do, the tree will die if you cut off the taproot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that 2 minutes or slightly?
Any final questions? Perhaps a final question before we... one more.
Can I offer the suggestion that we will quantity over virtue adds to Aristotle, as he incorporates, Augustine and Muslim scholars and various others, and there are people that believe that quantity account is better in a substantive philosophical sense than and some of the issues that some of the speakers have been wrestling with would have been addressed, I think, by reading the points.
Michael.
Yeah. So my research actually is on Aquinas, and so actually I do think Aquinas does do a really good job of actually engaging classical sources, Aristotle, but also the Stoics and Plato, as well as actually Muslim scholars. Actually, he's very engaged with Muslim scholars. They actually, once you actually recovered Aristotle and the Greek for us. So I think the roots, to use the roots metaphor, the roots are really winding, and they have different soil, and they often intersect in ways we can't easily tease out. And I think one important thing we think about these programs, especially universities like this at Oxford, but also Wake Forest, is actually we also bring people from different parts of the world with different kinds of roots. And so how can we actually water all of those roots and find a place where the garden can grow, right? But also fruitfully and together. And we all can nurture that each other and nurture each other in that process. So I think that's the key. How we also nurture each other in that process, given our different roots. And Aquinas is a great resource for that. There are others, Confucius being one. But I think we have many things we can draw on, including literature and history and social sciences, think about those questions. So I think it's really exciting for me to see the ways in which people think about these questions here at this conference. So thanks.
Thanks. Well, on that note, I'd like to perhaps you could join me in thanking all our panelists for being here.